if you think about it, in storytelling, you have to have the same thing too. So what's the emotion? What's the story you're trying to tell? And you have these tools that you have to use in order to compose the right music, the right story through your visuals, right? And what are your tools? What are your instruments to create that? You have perspective, you have your staging, you have your values, which is your lighting, and you have your color. Those are your four instruments. Just like in a symphony, when you're a composer, you would use a violin, you would use a cello, you would use a flute, and you would use, let's say, a harp. Those are your four instruments. Them in themselves as individual instruments, they're beautiful. They sounded beautiful, but only when you put them all together, that will make the right context for you. You wouldn't probably feel it when one instrument is the only one that's playing, but when you put them all together, they're doing different things. But if you put them all together, they will create an emotion, right? But in music, in music, when you change just one note from a minor to a major, the emotion change from, from something that's so ominous and scary to something that feels like victorious. Same thing in design. If you want to tell the story of, let's say, sadness, but you tweak your camera, you tweak your perspective. That tweaking of perspective, it would change the tone of your artworks. It's so maybe when you place the camera and looking down at your character, you feel that sadness, but for some odd reason you change the camera. You know what? Let me change the camera into an upshot because it looks cool. That change of camera may affect the story. It may not feel like, yeah, it may look cool. It would feel more heroic than sad. So it's not about just a cool looking photo or a cool looking illustration. It has to exude the story and be perceived by your audience rightly. It's like telling a joke. If you don't tell the joke the right way, your audience will not laugh at your joke. They won't get it. So same thing with illustration. When you just draw it just for the sake of drawing it and making it look cool, you have a big castle and a stick man on there, and it would look cool. But where's the emotion? Where's the concept? What's the mood of what's the story you're trying to tell? If you don't, if the audience didn't perceive that, especially if it's a keyframe illustration, then maybe you have to rework your composition. So it's exactly the same as music. So the artist can effectively tell the story visually by controlling the perception of the audience with the proper use of composition. So I'm going to use this as an example. So I'm Finnick, right? I want to show this from the perspective of Finnick. So you're Finnick. As an audience, I want you to feel being discriminated on. How would I do that using my four instruments, right? The first instrument is perspective. I want to make sure that you're looking up at the elephant. When you are being discriminated on, you feel small, which is conveniently Phoenix is small. So everybody who's discriminating you will feel big. So in your eyes, they are big. So I put the camera low angle, so Finnick will be looking at the elephant in front of him as somebody who's big, and it's an elephant, so it's much bigger. Having that. So um, also in terms of staging, I'll be looking at the elephant first. This is what the hierarchy of focus I was telling you guys about earlier. After finding which perspective or which point of view I want to tell the story from, now I have to work the staging into who's the person I'm going to look at first and who will be the second person I'm going to look at first. So I want you guys to look at the elephant first, then Finnick. Not everything. We're trained to, okay, make it high contrast so you can look at the high contrast. That will be your first read. Actually, there's higher than a high contrast. It's the eyes. So what I did was every time that you would see an eye, you would look at the eye first, then the high contrast. So anyway, if you take my mentorship class, guys, I would teach you all these things in terms of hierarchy of focus. But anyway, so we're looking at the elephant first, then we look at the high contrast, which is Finnick, which is dark over light. Values, my lighting, there's no dramatic lighting in here. It's just an ambient lighting inside the restaurant, right inside the ice cream parlor. So it has to feel inviting. right? It's some place it's not moody, some place that you would want to go into and eat. But of course, if you're not an elephant, you will be discriminated upon. Then the feeling would also be used. Color would also be used for feeling. The entire room is warm, inviting, except if you're not an elephant. That's why Phoenix is backdrop with cool colors. So if you squint your eye, I reserve all most of the cool colors around Phoenix. So when you as an audience you look at it, you would feel like, oh yeah, this place is warm and inviting, but why am I feeling so cold? It's because you're the ones being discriminated upon. So I reserve that color palette around him. So anyway, so that's the proper use of composition when you're doing an illustration. It's not just a cool piece of art. Make it look cool, but make it perceivable using the proper use of composition. So always remember, perspective plus staging plus values and color equals composition. All right, so I'm just gonna